In other business news now, the financial state of the South African consumer continues to worsen due to the ongoing economic pressure of the current tough economic climate. That's according to a money stress tracker compiled by DebtBusters. DebtBusters head Benay Sager speaks to us about this. Thank you so much for your time, Benay. It is a tough one when we look at the pressure that is on the South African consumer still. That pause in interest rates, it's only a day old at this point. Talk to us about what the report is telling us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. The money stress tracker was put in place, this is the second time we've done it, and we wanted to understand the conditions and the situation with regards to the South African consumer. Normally we talk to consumers who are in debt counseling, but this is consumers who are not in debt counseling, so it's quite a broad survey. And we wanted to understand a few things. One is how stressed are our people when it comes to finances, and then the knock-on effects of that. Two, we wanted to understand what were the sources of that stress. Three, we wanted to understand what are people doing about the stress. And four, we wanted to understand for those who are not yet doing something, how can we be helpful? And that's what the survey is about. And I think the main message from the survey is, compared to last year, overwhelmingly, the population seems to be more stressed about their finances. Last year, 70% told us that they were worried about their finances. This year, that number is up to 78%. And I think it's driven by a few things. As you rightfully pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, number one worry that consumers have is about 50% of them worry about not having enough money at the end of the month. And that's been consistent. But there's another big chunk who worry about essentially, whether they're going to be able to make repayments back for their debt at the end of the month. And that's about 40-something%. It's about 44%. Last year, that number was 36%, so it's gone up by a lot. And it's driven by the next point, which is that 23% of the consumers are worried about interest rate increases. So I think we, just like you, welcomed the news of yesterday, at least a bit of a reprieve. And I think, on top of that, the other impact has been that load shedding. I think about 17% of the consumers seem quite worried about the impact of this in the long term. So I think there's been a number of drivers getting all of us a bit overwhelmed with regards to finances. Now, the unfortunate thing is this has a knock-on effect on other aspects of life. And those who said they were stressed about finances, almost 94% of them said that carries on to their home life, which is something that I think we all need to be aware of, that often it's the finances that are driving the stress in other parts of life.
Absolutely, and a majority of that stress is that salaries have not been going up. I noticed in the report that there's a reading of 37% of consumers who say most and the bulk of their salaries is for servicing debt. What's to be said about the near-term trajectory there? Because we know that at this point it's just a pause in the interest rate hiking cycle, but the lending rate is still at 11.75%, which is quite heavy for any consumer's pocket.
Yeah, that's true. So at least we get a bit of a pause and actually be able to adjust. I think what's happened is that most of the consumers who are really struggling with the debt repayments at the moment, from what they tell us in the survey, is generally consumers who branched out and got a home loan or financed their vehicle for the first time in 2020 or 2021. Mostly younger consumers, and they have not actually seen the impact of something like the global financial crisis that many have lived through in the late 2000s. And as a result, this sudden and unrelenting increase in terms of interest rates, it's caught everyone by surprise, I must say. So over the last year and a half, pretty much every other month, you had to readjust your budget, while your pay may be only going up once a year if you were one of the lucky ones. So I think this gives the consumer a bit of breathing room. In terms of what people told us that they're doing, many of them seem to be looking for opportunities to ask for help from their families, which is it's good. Many of them selling personal items, but a majority of consumers are looking for higher paying or better jobs. So there's definitely an expectation and intent, particularly from young people, in terms of dealing with this stress, to be able to be upwardly mobile. I think the conditions are probably not great, from a macroeconomic perspective for that to happen in a broad range. But at least I think people are aware and they are making budgets. They're trying to stick to budgets. At least for the next few months, I think we get a bit of a reprieve that we can use the same budget we drew up last month.
Lastly, Benay, 4 out of 5 women are experiencing financial stress. Expand on that finding.
Yeah, we work with the psychologist to analyze the results, and what you say is true. Women often are the primary caretakers of households in South Africa, and in many cases, we see that women are also the primary breadwinners. Many of them are entrepreneurial and so on. And their stress levels seem to be higher than men, unfortunately. 80% of the women worry about finances, whereas 73% of the men worry about finances. Still both very high and higher than last year. But the one thing that happens here is even though the women's stress levels seem unfortunately higher than men, again, probably because they have to take care of a broader range of individuals in the household and so on, responsible for many duties. They also use, in terms of how they deal with the stress, there's a slightly separate response that women tend to talk more about it with each other, share it, and kind of in a way flock together, in terms of providing care and support. And I think this is very important as we particularly go into Women's Month next month. I think it's something that we all need to be aware, but it seems like, unfortunately, women tend to carry an overwhelmingly higher burden of financial stress in our country.
Thank you so much for your contribution in this conversation. Benay Sager is the head at DebtBusters, talking to us this morning about their money stress report indicating the continued pressure on the South African consumer.